966.
This is the 966, episode 93. Had to think about it for a second there with a little pause, Richard. How are you?
I'm good. I love, some variation of threes,
You're like Pierce. My son holds up 2 3s and says 3. And I say 6. And he's like, what? This is 3.
my brain's not far enough along for this, Dad.
But he is proud to be at 3. We are proud to be at 93, Richard. And we've got an awesome one this week. We're going to be speaking in a few moments with Dana Alajlani, who is head of public affairs for the GCC at Sanofi, is also with the American Chamber of Commerce in Saudi Arabia, AmChamKSA. And it's really a great conversation with Dana. And we'll be getting to that in just a few moments. Just awesome.
I love Dana's spirit, but I mean, what's really impressive about her is her overwhelming competence. When you speak with her, she knows her stuff. She has good insight. It's a really great conversation. It's wonderful to connect with her. And I think this was as the 966 tries to get a handle on things in Saudi Arabia, and let's say women in business or entrepreneurs, that sort of thing. You can't get the whole picture in one episode. I love this episode because it adds us and it expands the picture in terms of women in the workforce in Saudi Arabia, and it adds to it that as we're trying to contribute to the conversation. So it's just a great discussion and just a lot of fun to be with Dana.
Yes. I could not agree more, Richard. And we've also got a great episode as well surrounding that conversation. We're going to be talking in a little bit about following up to last week's conversation, which did very well as well, with Professor Simon Chadwick on sports washing and Saudi Arabia's sporting ambitions. And really, we take a couple of different turns in there about what's going on in the geopolitical economy of sporting, which is his expertise. And so we will be talking a little bit more about some new updates on that with a recent report in the Financial Times. We're going to get to Yallah as well. And Richard, last week, this last week was, as you know, a little weird because we had the 4th of July holiday on obviously the 4th, but it was a Tuesday, which is kind of not a cool day to have a holiday like that, just right in the middle of the week. So it sort of made that holiday weekend for us a little weird. So we see and have seen all of the feedback that you guys have sent us, but at least I am a little slow on responding to some of it, but we really appreciate it. And a lot of people love that conversation with Professor Simon Chadwick. So thank you for that. This one, Richard, from Trimex on YouTube. Nice to cover the health aspect of their strategy, which he's talking about the sports investing strategy. The Saudis are facing a regionally prevalent epidemic of non-transmissible illnesses that require lifestyle adaptations to tackle effectively. I think they hiked a tax on sugar products a while ago, which I think is true, actually, Richard. That has decreased consumption of sweets by a certain percentage, but I can't find the source, he said. Anecdotally, I don't know if that's true because every time I go over there, it's just sweets on sweets and so many dates that I can't believe I'm not twice my current size. Trimex also noted, and I actually we talked about this right before we jumped on, Richard, did you guys change the format? I kind of miss the old 1+ hour long unedited videos that were a nice listen to. Yeah, so just a little bit of sausage making, part of the sausage factory. You can go into the sausage factory floor. The full episodes, when they exceed a certain limit, about 2 hours, sometimes is with an hour-long interview rather, and then a show on either side. They get to be very large videos, and so they're very hard to upload to YouTube. So some weeks we don't have the full episode on YouTube, just segments. I think this week we will. So sorry about that, Trimax. You can listen to them, though, on our audio channels, I should say, Richard, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, the 966 will be there. So if you want that full, sweet summer listen for the 966, tune in there.
Yeah, we should do a survey. We've talked internally about, so we do the episode, capture the episode with our guests, try to do it earlier in the week. And it has to be technical, as I say, in an improper term, but it's produced And as you say, Lucian, sometimes with the big ones, the term is render. It takes forever to render it after you put it in. You see Lucian's and so we like to publish it along with our Sustig review on Fridays. And there's times where they go on just, it's like watching a watch clock, never moves. And that's how it happens with the render. As Lucian's trying to get this thing in, you're 8 hours in, 10 hours in, 12 hours in on a render. And you're like, will this ever happen? So the question is, we have discussed publishing episodes on Mondays. And it occurred to me, Lucian, that would at least give the weekend for these these monster ones to render.
That's true. We did also talk about the possible downside of that, Richard, which is that because things are happening so quickly in Saudi Arabia these days, it's not like the old days. In 2 to 3 days, some of the stuff might get stale, or there may be some huge mega announcement, or something might change. So just is very common. Yeah,
that's a great point. So sausage making is we do the segment separately. So we'll try and capture the guests Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We usually do our segments Thursday. So you're exactly right. So when it comes out on Friday, it's fresh.
Yes. So you may notice that we change outfits. Yeah.
I try and keep the same one on.
Yeah, me too. I wear the same thing every time. So, it's actually the only outfit I have. It's just one white shirt.
Yours just got,
kid stains. Yeah, I made the mistake, Richard, of wearing, I really like wearing white pants because you can only do it a certain time of year in the US, really. I mean, formally, properly. I love white pants, and I went through 2 pairs this weekend, all the barbecues and stuff, with my kids just coming up and saying, "Hey, Daddy," and then just wiping their face on my pants. And I'm like, "Oh, cool."
I love it.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of being a dad. It's worth it.
It's so worth it. Yeah, so worth it. Richard, one more comment from Abu Saud 4554 on YouTube. Very good job, gentlemen. What an interesting guest. Mashallah. I have one small suggestion, if I may. If there is an Arabic subtitle for your episodes, I guess that will increase the viewers. A lot of Saudis don't know English very well, and will very much enjoy the huge efforts you guys do. Thank you so much. So yeah, we're also working on this, Richard. This has been in the cards for a while. This is also another technical challenge with many parts. It's something that we aspire to have because we know that will dramatically increase our audience size. We should note that our audience is pretty much split right down the middle between the US and Saudi Arabia, maybe 2 or 3 more points, 44 to 41 type thing between the US and Saudi Arabia, and then around the rest of the world, 50 countries, Richard. So, I mean, we do see that as a way forward for us, undoubtedly. We'll get there.
100%. It's Lucian and I have a endless list.
Yeah, endless
of things we want to do with the show and with our overarching program and the whole organization, and we're trying to work our way to it, budget wise and sort of bandwidth wise. This is up there. We'd love to get this up because we recognize, same as you, that it's an important. It'd be an important service, and it would make our product better. So yeah, we're absolutely all in with you on that.
And Richard, I mean, I think you would agree. This is sort of a good problem to have, which is we have many areas in which we can grow that we've identified. That's way better than having the opposite problem of we don't know how to grow the show. This show has grown so quickly, I think beyond both of our expectations, well beyond our expectations. So we really appreciate everybody tuning in and all this feedback and comments, good and bad. We love hearing it all. And we're excited that this has taken off.
I like how you said that because my wife, when she acknowledges the many areas in which I need to grow, doesn't think it's a good problem. But in the context of the 966, I agree 100%.
Richard, let's get to it. What is your one big thing this week?
My one big thing. Well, we talk about Vision 2030, as you know. And it infuses pretty much everything we, as we assess Saudi Arabia. And we know from firsthand experience, we know from our guests, and I think in particular people like Mark Thompson, King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, who studies the socioeconomic trends in Saudi Arabia. We know from talking with young entrepreneurs like Renato Jeffrey or Sarah Bin Laden or anybody, and they talk about the paradigm shifting impact of Vision 2030 as it pertains to them, and how it has changed, how they look at things, what they think is possible, how they approach almost everything they do in their lives. And so we know there's a ground truth to it, that things are really different in Saudi Arabia. It's always interesting to find when people put some analysis to it and try and get some data points. And so the reason is this, is I have referenced in the past, and we've talked about it, Lucien, this group called Carma, CARMA. It's a global media intelligence provider. About a year and a half ago or so, they analyzed the impact of Vision 2030 on media perceptions of Saudi Arabia. So they've come out with an updated one, which is great. And I read an article about it in Campaign Middle East. Campaign Middle East covers consultancies and a lot of things like that, PR firms. And I've already communicated with Rawan Hashim, who's head of insights from MENA at Carma, and I'm hoping she'll come on the show. But in the interim, I wanted to share with some things that they had found, because it underpins sort of what we talk about. And I'm not going to say it's anecdotal, because our understanding is more than anecdotal. It's firsthand experience, and it's on the ground research. So I guess, but this is data analysis, and the way they do it, Carma, is they conducted a comprehensive research analysis of media coverage across 33 major markets and over 2,400 major international titles in traditional digital and broadcast media. And the focus of the research was to understand the impact of Vision 2030, specifically on Saudi's reputation. Also to examine how the country was perceived in regional, international, top-tier media. So it's a milieu in which we live, because we're sort of curating from media and that sort of thing. So it's interesting what they found. The research, and this is some of the things they pull out, it showcased a 4% increase in positivity and a 12% decrease in negativity between the first and last quarter of 2022. Vision, and this is a term of art, I guess, in the business. Vision 2030 share of voice grew by 13% by the end of 2022. I guess share of voice is a measure of the market that your brand owns compared to your competitors. I'm not sure who the competitor is in this situation, but Vision 2030's share of voice is growing. One of the things this Carma report sort of points out is social topics witnessed a surge of 10% in coverage. Economic news declined by 12%. And again, this is between the first and last quarter of 2022, last year. According to Carma, this evolving media focus indicated a growing recognition of the societal impact of Vision 2030, something we talk about all the time, as the kingdom's efforts to drive social development resonated with both regional and international audiences. So that's interesting that, basically they're saying that the impetus, the social impetus for Vision 2030 is being more widely understood and at least internalized by regional and international audiences. So Carma's research revealed key positive drivers. There are 6 of them, and I'll follow it up with key negative drivers. So the 6 that they pointed out is a booming economy, which we're familiar with. Last year, Saudi Arabia was the fastest growing G20 economy. Thriving tourism and entertainment industries, which we cover and we're well aware. And I want to point out, this wasn't even a conversation 5 years ago. Building stronger global ties. And this would be things like Saudi Arabia's active role in peace negotiations with Yemen, growing cooperations with several nations such as China and South Korea. These were all heavily discussed in the media. Dominating the global oil market. Obviously, that's well known. Transforming the sports landscape. Again, not part of the discussion 5 years ago. And something we cover in depth here at the 966. Number 6, promoting rich cultural heritage. Again, this is something we talk about, and I think it's really fascinating because a big component of Vision 2030 is taking existing cultural heritage and putting it forward. And this is, arts events, festivals, any number of things. So those are the positive six. Negative drivers that in Carma's research gain traction and warranted attention. One, accusation of sports washing, the flip side of that, higher profile in sports. Two, deepening rift in U.S.-Saudi relations, something we covered deeply here and extensively. Three, the flip side of dominance in oil is backlash over oil cuts. Four, scrutiny of ambitious sustainability goals. This is interesting. This is skepticism raised by top-tier outlets regarding Saudi Arabia's ability to fulfill its green commitments. Particularly interesting with respect to the NEOM project. So that's something you need to put in your mental register if you're Saudi Arabia, is there's doubts about their sustainability claims. And this is five. This is really interesting because this is not something I would have picked. Debate sparks by Jeddah demolitions. So, we've talked about Jeddah Central, and it's, there's a revitalization going on in a lot of Saudi cities. And in that case, in Saudi Arabia, I think it was 5 or 7 neighborhoods that they've cleared out because they're trying to revitalize and redesign the city in that area. So that comes across as a negative in Carma's research. And 6, experts weighing in on the feasibility of Saudi mega projects. And the kingdom's ability to deliver on its mega projects came under scrutiny by experts and journalists. NEOM, in particular, raised skepticism regarding feasibility and funding challenges. So in closing, the article ends, the kingdom's ability to overcome political challenges, the prominence of social themes amidst geopolitical unrest, the far-reaching influence of Vision 2030, and the emergence of sports and tourism as key discussion topics all underscored Saudi Arabia's position as a crucial regional and international player. All right. So there it is. I mean, I liked it because, as I said, it's based on some analysis and some comprehensive research. I hope we can get Rowan on to talk about it more in depth. But really interesting. And in some ways, it corroborates what we're seeing. In other ways, there was a couple of surprises. So all in all, a worthwhile read.
Richard, this type of stuff, these types of reports are enormously valuable, like you noted, in just piecing together a broader understanding of Saudi Arabia. Obviously, these are just media trends and what is being portrayed in the media. It isn't a full survey of every human living being who answered direct questions, but it shows how perceptions have changed. And I think this is great. And one thing that I really want to note that jumped out to me when you started discussing this and when you shared this last night and we sort of like looked at it was the negatives. I mean, if you jump right to the study highlighting some negative drivers that gain traction and warranted attention, that's important wording because it says negative drivers that gain traction. So these are negative issues that are starting to become more and more common. But if you look at that list, like that list is, if they did this 5 or 6 years ago, and they didn't, but if they did, think about what would be on that list and what isn't on it today. Not 9/11, not Jamal Khashoggi's murder, not education or what they teach in schools, not financing Islamic buildings abroad that could become hotbeds of radicalization, not financing terrorism through charities, not women's rights in Saudi Arabia. I feel like those are the things you sort of hear casually. I mean, that's totally anecdotally because it's just my circle or like people that I talk to randomly. But those were the issues 2, 3, 4 years ago, and then also 10, 12, 14 years ago. To have this list have none of those on it is incredible. Oil cuts, U.S.-Saudi rift in relations, sports washing, ability to fill green commitments. Just, we're talking about a new set of challenges, and there are always going to be that set of challenges. In 5 years or 10 years, no matter how successful Vision 2030 is or how successful the reforms are, you're going to have another list of criticisms for Saudi Arabia. The way things are going right now, they'll probably be different than this list. But that's amazing to me.
I think it's a great point. I think that's an excellent point. And it's a sort of, we talk, since we've been curating news for how long
14 years at least.
and even before we were together, I was doing it before that. You mentally tick off in your mind terms And then you start registering how frequently it happens. And then you start registering how it becomes sort of just an accepted phrase and blah, blah, blah. And you see over the arc of a time period how perceptions change, language changes. And your point is a really good one because, everybody has something to complain about Saudi Arabia, the U.S., or any country. And it's interesting how the conversation has different touchstones, different language, different keywords, and I would consider it, which is what you're suggesting, and I think very clearly, and you're accurate. I couldn't agree 100% that this is significant progress.
Yeah, Richard, and I really like the way that they sort of put this in the last sentence that you read. Resilience, innovation, and a commitment to positive change. I mean, that's what we have seen, especially you and me, in the last 5 or 6 years and in the last 2+ years ish that we've been doing this podcast. There is just a steady, focused commitment on Vision 2030 and doing what Saudi Arabia wants to do for itself that would be in its best interest. And they are hearing all the criticism for sure, but they also know that they can't really do anything about people not updating their perceptions of the kingdom. They just have to stay on the path of what their vision is. And they have been doing that. And it's weird because it's 2023 now. And man, there's a lot of progress. We talked last week about NEOM and all the progress happening there in just the previous week from that podcast. And then in the last year, it's stretched out times 10 or 12. It's unbelievable. And so, and Richard, this makes me think too about the piece that we discussed last week that it was your one big thing that got a lot of feedback and a lot of attention, which was drawing attention to the David Rundell piece and Gefeller talking about, let's get down to the facts on 9/11 here. Let's talk about some of these talking points in the US that are way too common, that are inaccurate. And so, I don't know, just this is a really cool, and yeah, Richard, I hope that we have someone from Carma on here to discuss this, because this is great.
I would expand on your on one other thing, and I don't want to go too long. I have no doubt that the Saudi government has data mining for this, and they are deep into understanding what social media, what's being said on social media, and all sorts of platforms. I mean, it's a responsible thing to do. One of the big differences between now and 6-7 years ago is Saudi Arabia is significantly less concerned about criticism than it used to be. It could get tied up and tripped over about any kind of aspersion, or it would just spend a lot of energy and time and perhaps diplomatic and brand equity, addressing something that they perceive as an injustice or inaccurate or unnecessary, whatever, sort of in the forum of public discourse that is normal. They don't do that as much anymore. And I think it's healthy, and I think it's good. And I say this, and specifically with sports washing, because there's I forget what the term I use, but a firestorm or of criticism about sports washing. I don't think they particularly care, because they have other plans. And I've said it before, but I do think they handle criticism a little better than they used to.
Yeah.
And I think that's in part because they feel very confident about the direction in which they're headed, and that they've had some successes that stacked up and this sort of thing. So, that's just an aside, but it sort of is it is consistent with the conversation about international perceptions of Saudi Arabia and media perceptions. So anyway, that's, my last thought on it, I guess.
That was good, Richard. That is a really good one. And we're going to, as we always do, include a link to this piece. And inshallah, we will have somebody from Carma joining us in the near future to discuss it, but that'll be in the comments of the show notes as well. And yeah, but really good, Richard. Richard, my one big thing this week, we're going back to sports. We're on a sports.
We have sports in Yallah too.
Yeah, that's right. We do. I got to keep my live golf hat by the recording desk here.
Should I grab mine? I got.
Yeah, would you grab yours?
I got my range coach.
Is it nearby?
Hold on 1 second.
Okay, we just did a little cut there, Richard, so that we could get our various live golf merch on.
Nice.
Okay. We're such dorks.
Yes, yes, we
Uh,
are.
okay.
The beauty of it is we get to be dorkish together.
That's right. Yeah. It's like,
It's it's like a chess club,
that's
you and
right.
me.
That's right. Although having gone to a live golf event with you, Richard, it is significantly cooler than any chess club. In fact, it's cooler than normal golf. We both asserted. Anyway, Richard, my one big thing this week, sports bender. It's summer. We are playing the cards that are dealt to us because, as we discussed, actually, and kind of connected to your one big thing this week, a lot of the media coverage on Saudi Arabia is about sports. I mean, if you were to sort of scan, and we did this last week, it's like half of all stories are on sports or something having to do with sports because sports media is huge. So you have European soccer and football, you have live golf and all of that going on. So it's just been sports on sports and sports. This week, Richard, is another big story for Saudi Arabian sports. A new report from the Financial Times this week, which cited two unnamed sources familiar with the matter. And before we let speculation run wild, neither of us are the sources for that story. Saudi Arabia plans to launch a multi-billion-dollar golf investment company to expand its sports interests following its power grab in golf and success in English football. That's a quote from the Financial Times. So here is what we know based on the story from the Financial Times, which is one of the most rigorous paywalls out there. So I'm going to kind of just talk about the facts that are in there. We'll include a link to it, but yeah, kind of a tough paywall to crack into.
Yeah, hopefully you subscribe.
Hopefully you subscribe. It is a great paper. It's a great
is.
publication. It's just, yeah. So you just can't like share articles. I found a way to do it, but you typically can't.
And if you can afford to subscribe, please talk to us about, becoming a supporter of Saudi U.S. trade.
Yeah, just give us the money and we'll read you the Financial Times on the podcast. The Sports Investment Group, it does not have a name, Richard. That's what they called it in the story. The Sports Investment Group is in the formation stage, and it will unsurprisingly be part of the Kingdom's Sovereign Wealth Fund, the PIF. The fund will have what the Financial Times called a quote unquote war chest, which if it's Saudi Arabia can only mean a lot of money to fund its expansion, in a sign that Riyadh is committed to making further acquisitions, investments, and JVs in football, tennis, and other sports. Richard, the article quotes Professor Simon Chadwick about 4 paragraphs down, and I had to read very closely to see if they had just listened to last week's episode and use his quotes. They didn't, I don't think, which is sad because it would have been really great to get that hat tip in the Financial Times. And that would make us one step closer to having lunch with the Financial Times, one of my favorite sections. So obviously our listeners and viewers know Simon Chadwick was on with us last week. And he sort of answered some questions about the size of the fund. There isn't really anything on that. The article then goes on to discuss the recent history of the PIF's interest and foray into sports, starting with its investment into the world of golf, live golf, and PGA, and some of that context, and now interest in tennis, which our regular listeners know quite well. So back to what we know from the article, neither Live Golf nor Newcastle United will fall under the new company, according to one person familiar with the matter, who said it would be focusing on new opportunities, which is very interesting. The company's launch will coincide with the PIF asserting a bigger role in the kingdom's football ambitions, which, Richard, was your one big thing a few weeks ago, including strengthening its clubs at home, investing into the clubs itself, with the PIF taking stakes in 4 clubs, and also with acquisitions of major global stars for the Saudi League. One more interesting bit in this piece, Richard, an interesting comp that the piece makes. The report says the new sports company could adopt the same approach with the PIF has taken towards the gaming industry with its investment company Savvy. The company, which is chaired by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has a $38 billion war chest and has spent almost $8 billion on acquisitions over the past 18 months in what one analyst, is according to the Times, described as a, quote, bulldozer approach, snapping up among others the US-based games developer Scopely for $5 billion. So this is news. This is a new strategy for the PIF. So instead of having this PIF-wide interest in sports, it would be sort of compartmentalizing it into a subsidiary, or it's not really clear on exactly how it might be structured. But this would sort of formalize the PIF's, or crystallize the PIF's interest in sports into a organization that has its mandate to invest in sports and would be separate from some of the other stuff they're doing. So this is news and this is interesting. We will see as more details come out in the wake of this article, which was published about on Monday or Tuesday. Fascinating stuff. Yeah, I mean that's my one big thing this week, because we've covered so many sporting stories, and this is a big one this week.
Yeah, excellent one. Really interesting. I guess 3 initial thoughts. One, it's fascinating how Saudi Arabia has sort of become the boogeyman in global sports. Because when you look at this article, is there anything there? There is an interesting analysis of what's gone on and that sort of thing, but it's right now, it's just speculation, right?
Yeah, two sources saying, hey, they're setting up, formalizing.
And we give it credibility because it's the FT. We know they're responsible in their journalism, and they try to be. So we would anticipate that is coming. But the fact is, we're way on the front end of speculation of maybe possible, could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's a big article on the FT, and this is the sort of the gargantuan gravity that Saudi Arabia is bringing right now. So that's one thought. The second thought is, I think it probably makes sense to try and get a step removed from the PIF. We don't need to have, I'm sure they, it's just like in the litigation between LIV and PGA, they're trying to pull in the PIF and have, Yasser Rumayyan testify and this sort of thing. And that's an uncomfortable place to be. I think the PIF would rather have it be removed. So I think, from just an organizational standpoint, it makes sense. And as it mentions, you have the template with the Savvy Sports, which is a dedicated, entity to go into esports and develop that sector. The third thing is why not? And I say that because it's October 2021, 2 things happened. Consummated the acquisition of Newcastle United, announced LIV. So we're well within 2 years, under 2 years since that date. Newcastle United has been an unmitigated success. I mean, this was a club that was, at death throes with its owner, between its constituents, its fans. It was about to be relegated from the Premier League. Had a tremendous season. Is now was at the top of the tables, pretty much, in the Premier League this past season. Goodwill aside, the value of the club is being particularly enhanced, so it's a good business investment. LIV, as I said, with under 2 years ago, now has a seat at the table with the PGA and Global Golf. They have not taken over PGA, do not control PGA, but they are a partner in Newco, the company that they have created with PGA and the DP World Tour. And of course, we know that that's all still to be determined because it's an unfolding saga. But whatever brand they were trying to, whatever reputational bounce they were trying to get with LIV, is now transforming possibly into some economic and financial investment gain. So anyway, their forays into this have been successful. LIV is clearly still a major loss leader, but you can see what it's gotten them, and it's gotten them to the table to maybe transform into some real returns. And they're doing this across the table. They're looking, as we've talked about, they're looking at professional tennis, men's and women's, and we'll have a Yallah on that. So anyway, those are my 3 thoughts, and there's probably more as I consider it, but it is interesting. The distance to the discussion has come with regard to Saudi participation in sports, and I hark back to Simon Chadwick, who made the point in that excellent episode that the FT should have drawn from. Saudi Arabia has spent decades punching below its weight. Now it appears to be punching at its weight or above.
Great point. I'm going to leave it there, Richard, because those are all really good points as a follow-on to that. Let's get to our conversation with Dana Alajlani. She's terrific, a really good conversation, and getting her perspective on everything in Saudi Arabia. She's head of public affairs for the GCC at Sanofi. but she discusses really her role in part as co-chairwoman of the AmCham. Just enjoy this because it really is. She's terrific.
Yeah, it's wonderful to spend time with her. She has a lot of insights.
We're delighted to welcome on to the 966 Dana Alajlani, who is head of public affairs for the GCC at Sanofi, the French multinational pharmaceutical and healthcare company headquartered in Paris. Dana is also co-chairwoman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Saudi Arabia, AmChamKSA, and is involved there with the Women in Business Committee. Dana, welcome to the 966. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me on the show.
Hi, Dana. So excited. How this happened. Dana, you and I first met when you were public and government affairs with ExxonMobil, and I was quite impressed then. You moved on to bigger and bigger things. And although you're working for a European company, we still love you. But I was looking, and we have had Bill Foster at AmChamKSA, the president of KSA, and I've sort of been watching the Women in Business Committee for some time. I think it's 3 years in, established 3 years ago, if that's correct. I just happened to look, and I said, and it looked co-chair, Dana Alajlani. I guess, oh, how lucky are we? So I reached out to you to talk about this, and you said, great. And so we're really looking forward to talking about the Women in Business Committee, but also your personal story and your take on sort of the ecosystem and the environment for women working in Saudi Arabia, the employment issues, any number of things. But let's go back and get a baseline. Let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So yes, I was very happy to hear from you also, Richard. Clearly, women and inclusion in the workplace is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And the reason for that is, so I'm a Saudi who got the opportunity to get educated abroad, and I came back and I started my career almost 20 years ago. It's always shocks me when I say that, but it was a very different Saudi Arabia. And this is, before Vision 2030 and before all of these changes. And so clearly things were not very easy at the time. And so I personally know what it feels like to be the only woman in the room. And in my specific case, many of the times, the first woman who has ever been employed by that organization. And so, given these challenges, I think that a theme that kind of developed over my career, and I think unconsciously I kind of went for the jobs where I was told that no woman or Saudi woman has ever taken on these roles. And so I always tried to work hard, get these roles, and then, just to prove that Saudi women are capable. And then in my own way of giving back, I tried through mentorship and advocacy and sponsorship to support in making sure that when I left those organizations, I was no longer the only woman at the organization. So really, it's been a theme that's followed my career, and I ended up by chance pursuing a career that involves, I do government engagement and negotiations, which, as you can appreciate, 12, 13 years ago was not a very typical career path for a woman. And there weren't, in fact, many women in the government at that point in time. Thankfully, things have changed, but it's a different Saudi Arabia today.
We already, my mind's turning. So it is. So your purview now is broader. So your GCC, you're looking at all the Gulf Cooperation Council states. Are you interacting with a lot of women at your level?
Okay, so yes and no. In terms of government engagement, I think that with Vision 2030, there have been a lot of women that have been put in senior roles. And an example is Her Royal Highness Princess Rima in the US. And so you can see that in some senior government roles, there are now women as deputy ministers. However, in the corporate world, sometimes this trend has not been as visible, and there aren't as many women in senior roles in the corporate world. Now, when you look at other countries, you see also there's a similar kind of trend in the UAE or in other countries. Like, for example, in the UAE, you have some women who are ministers. We're not in that position yet in Saudi Arabia. So it differs from country to country. And so yes and no, it depends.
Yeah. And I apologize. I sort of went off script there because I thought that it's interesting because your vision is bigger now. But let's talk about the Women in Business Committee. And we had a fascinating discussion a couple of weeks ago about the trajectory that committee has gone on. And you just finished up what you thought was a really successful mentorship program. Can you talk about, the path that Women in Business Committee has taken and why it's sort of changed some of its targets?
Yes. So I have been blessed with first parents who pushed me to always, try my best and go for all of these positions that were not open for women. And then as a mother and a wife, I had to juggle work-life balance. And so without the support of my husband to enable me to take on these roles and to put up my hand, a lot of the things that I have achieved would not have been possible. And so I know that women sometimes need a little bit more of a support system in order to enable them to go for these, to develop their career. And so I found myself always gravitating, it's been, I think now for 7 or 8 years, towards being part of the corporate women networks at the organizations where I work. So, they're called different things. And for example, today I co-chair at Sanofi, it's called Gender Balance Employee Resource Group. So I co-chair that. So I do that internally. And then externally, I co-chair the Women in Business. So I think that being part of these type of committees gives you the opportunity to support a cause that you believe in, but also to reflect back on some of the things that have helped you in your career, and therefore come up with programs that can potentially help other women in their careers. So when we first started WIB, we focused a lot on entrepreneurs, and there was a reason for that. In Saudi Arabia, if you look back 20, 30 years ago, some of the sectors that were open to women were the nonprofit sector, were the healthcare sector, and a good way for somebody to potentially enter the workforce and get around some of these limitations was to start their own business. And so there are some very important entrepreneurs that started their businesses 20, 30 years ago. And therefore, this was the focus of WIB when we first started. But it became apparent after the first year that there's a lot of focus from the government and the private sector on programs to support women entrepreneurs in the kingdom, which is great. And therefore, we felt that perhaps we could use our resources and our knowledge to support women in a different way. And we felt that there was a gap in supporting women in advancing their career in the corporate world. And so this is where we sat down and we thought of how can we help them. One of the things that has personally shaped my career is mentorship. So I have personally been blessed by mentors who walked into my life at a time when I least expected it and transformed my career in ways that I never thought was possible. And how they did that was through, for example, kind of helping me understand the external environment and translate that into, opportunities, and put my hand up when opportunities came along. And sometimes even when I didn't think I was ready, they pushed me to take on these roles. And so I felt that mentorship really helped me achieve some of the goals that I've achieved today. And the women in the Women in Business Committee felt strongly about mentorship. So that is when we started building our flagship program about a couple of years ago. We've done it twice so far. And then over those 2 years, it wasn't even enough to launch it last year. What we did was we launched it, we evaluated it, we edited it, we made sure that it effectively helped women. And we have some amazing success stories that came out of the mentorship program, like women getting promotions, women resigning and getting another job at another company, and so really like pushing their careers forward. And so that's how we've developed some of the programs in the Women in Business. And now they're really focused on helping women in the corporate world push their career and progress their career into these more senior roles.
So in the Saudi work environment, and I think maybe you can talk about this, in terms of employment of women, there are some 2030 benchmarks which have already been hit.
Yes.
But I get the sense with your mentorship program that it's sort of beyond the metrics. It's about what the experience is and what the challenges these women are facing in the workplace, which is not just, it's no longer a legal equality, which I think has been mandated to a large extent, but there are any number of other issues. Can you talk a little bit about, over the course of these 2 years, what are the issues that women who are trying to advance in the corporate workplace in Saudi Arabia are facing, if there are priority issues?
So yes, it's true. Thankfully, with Vision 2030, we've reached these targets. So the target was 30%. And I think the last report I saw, it stands at 33%. So which is amazing. When I joined the workforce, it was, I think, 9%. And so these are amazing achievements. I always push myself to, so what's next? What can we do more? And so some of the challenges, I think, remain in the fact that when you look at how this diversity has been achieved, you will find a higher percentage of women at entry level, and then a few at senior level that were appointed. But then there's a gap in the middle. Mm-hmm. So I feel that the next chapter that we need to address in the corporate world, in the government sector, is looking at this middle layer and then looking at the top layer and having the diversity, the 30%, 33% reflected in the entire organization from entry level all the way to the board. So I feel that this is really like the next thing that we need to focus on. And this is something that our mentorship program supports with, because these are the so we have criteria for who we accept in the mentorship program. And typically it's women with a few years of experience, because really we're looking to accelerate their career in that middle management area.
And culturally, we talked a little bit, a lot of these are women middle managers, but there's still, would you characterize them as a younger cohort? I mean, obviously, there's not a lot, the number of 55 to 60-year-old women who are working in the Saudi workforce is very small because the base is so small. They didn't have an opportunity. But as women are coming in, each of these cohort groups will get bigger and bigger. This cohort group, when they come into a corporate environment, and even though legally there's equity, are they being accepted? Is there resistance? Is it, and that's a broad statement, but just in terms of sort of a broad take on it, what are the major sort of cultural challenges they're seeing in trying to move ahead, trying to establish themselves, trying to earn the respect and regard that would help them move forward in a company?
So yes, you've touched on another aspect of diversity, which we're seeing playing out right now with all of these young women and younger generation. There's a very big momentum behind Vision 2030, and therefore there's a very big influx into the private sector and the government sector, with wanting to be part of the change. And so historically, when you look at the leaders in the past in the government and in the private sector, a lot of them are older men, and technology was not part of their career or daily use. And so you have a different type of diversity that's playing out right now, and it's really generational diversity, where there is this older generation that has a lot of knowledge and a lot of experiences to share, and this influx of this new generation that's coming in, and really connecting them both is very important. So through the mentorship program, we tried to do that. But it's not only through the mentorship program, it's also through things like your show, honestly, because your show uses technology and social media, which are mediums that appeal to this generation. So for the older generation to use these tools to connect with with the younger generation, to make sure that this knowledge is not lost and that there's a bridge between what has been done in the past and what we're trying to do in the future.
It's fascinating. So, and you could, I guess, this tension. I wouldn't characterize it tension, but this reality is not only just young women; it's young males. The same dynamic. Interesting that they have that to share. The women who are coming into the mentorship program are. And there's there's an application process. So these young women are, and they're not necessarily young, but they're skilled. The professional, obviously they're very motivated because they're attracted to this in order to move forward. Where are these women looking for jobs? And I say that because it's an interesting dynamic that was brought up to us by we have an ongoing discussion. Lucien can confirm our ongoing discussion with an avid listener, talking about where young talent goes. And the point was, we have things like PIF. We have these largely state-owned organizations who are paying pretty good money, for sure. Then we have a growing group of corporates who are expanding their base, lots of influx of people opening offices. And you're familiar with the regional HQ process. There's a lot of job opportunities coming to Riyadh. There's a lot of job opportunities being created by the government. Where are these women going, these professional women?
So we talked a little bit about the momentum behind Vision 2030. It's really invigorated the younger generation, and many of them want to be part of the change. And so given that, they are gravitating towards the government sector. So we're in a situation where the private sector is competing very aggressively with the government sector for talent, and I think that's great, because like I told you, I started my career, I do government engagement, and there were no women in the room, no women in the building. In certain entities, there weren't even restrooms for women, right? So this is a sector that historically did not have many women in it. So for you now to go to a government entity and see almost gender parity sometimes in certain meetings and in certain forums, it's pretty impressive. And I understand their drive, because even in the corporate sector, like my job is government engagement and working on aligning Vision 2030 projects with business opportunities. And so it's really a source of excitement and motivation. And so we find a lot of these women and men, young graduates from abroad, from the universities here in Saudi Arabia, gravitating towards the government sector. So the private sector is trying to attract this talent. Sometimes they can't pay the salaries that are being paid by the private sector. So this is a challenge. And sometimes the projects are not going to be as visible or clearly linked to Vision 2030. And so maybe some of them will not see the excitement of working in the corporate world. So this is the kind of dynamics that we're seeing right now. But I feel that the tide is shifting a little bit, and I feel that after their government jobs, you can see many of them are going to the corporate world to start working on also building these projects, these opportunities, diversifying the economy by working in the corporate world towards achieving some of these Vision 2030 goals, because like it will take both sectors to make Vision 2030 a reality, and not the government can't do it alone.
Fascinating, because that's sort of the almost the exact reverse of, say, in the States, where the private sector pays more and in many terms seen as more attention grabbing. You're going to you have a bigger platform on which to shine, as opposed to if you went into government. And I guess that speaks to the activity and the weight that a place like PIF and other sort of largest state-owned enterprises are playing in the Saudi economy. Almost every so in the U.S., and because you studied here, you got a number of degrees here at Tufts, but if all things were equal at U.S. colleges in terms of quality of applicants, I'd say most of them would be about 75% women. And we've talked with many employers in Saudi Arabia when they talk about their interest in bringing women on board and expanding their employment opportunities for women. The quality of applicants vis-a-vis male applicants, almost always women are really very strong. Is that a tension in Saudi Arabia at all? I mean, when you have these really capable, motivated, focused women coming in and competing in a milieu that's really been largely male-oriented, male-dominated?
So the short answer is yes.
I know you're going to try and be diplomatic, but
yes, but let's just take a step back. I explained a little bit how things were different in the past for women, and there weren't as many opportunities in the corporate world and in the government sector for women. So a trend that was very present over the past couple of decades is that the level of education of women in Saudi Arabia is higher than the level of education of men. So this is statistics, right? These are numbers. And the reason for that was because they couldn't work, and therefore they spent more time at the universities getting higher degrees. So then all of a sudden the workplace opened up to women in a very quickly. It opened up to women, and so they started applying for jobs. And so in the base case, sometimes the qualifications are higher, just because the women had more time to spend at college, and men started working sooner. So that's some of the dynamics that are very specific to this country. And so the other thing is you also have in the government and in the private sector, you have a lot of companies and senior leaders that are men that really believe in giving equal opportunities to women. And therefore, because of that, and because there haven't been that many women in the workplace, you find that they are very keen to hire as many women as possible, as quickly as possible, in order to remedy the fact that they were excluded from the workplace for many years. So is it true that maybe more women are finding employment opportunities than men today? Perhaps. But there are underlying factors like the level of education, the fact that they have been excluded for so long. But then when you look at hiring process at, for example, Sanofi and ExxonMobil and many global companies around the world, usually hiring is never done based on gender. It's based on, what they try to do is they try to have an equal pool of candidates to choose from. So if you're hiring for a position and you have 4 candidates that have reached the final round, and the 4 candidates are male, I think that it's only fair for companies, and this is exactly what happens at Sanofi, to ask for 50-50 representation in the pools of candidates that have applied for the specific job. And then selection is based on merit and not on gender.
At that point. when you have
Yes.
that more broadly represented pool.
Yes.
This is and I don't want to put you in hypotheticals, but we're in a fascinating point right now. So Vision 2030 was announced in 2016. We are at the halfway point between 2016 and 2030. A lot of what we talk about on the 966 is that 2030 is a goal. It's not a promise. And so if these goals are 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% achieved, that's all good because it's the direction that matters. But in terms of women in the workforce, what would you like to see continue in terms of current trajectory? Where would you hope to be in the next 7 years of this sort of march to 2030?
So I think we already touched upon the fact that I can see today a lot of women in entry-level positions and few at the top. I would like to see over the next 7 years the 30% or even more than 30% workforce being women across the entire organization. I would like to see more women in board positions, CEO positions, middle management. I think that when you look at the number, it's a great number to have achieved, but if you dig a little deeper, it will not be equally distributed among organizations. And I feel that this could be the next thing that we can work on. I know that personally at Sanofi, this is something that we work on all the way globally and locally, all the way from entry level to the company. I think that Saudi Arabia has, even other countries in the region, this is not pointing the finger just here, right? There's room for improvement this area across the entire organizations and government entities.
So looking forward, it really speaks to what the Women in Business Committee is doing, because your mentorship program is trying essentially to fill these middle management, upper management, the population of Saudi women, make it larger, more competent, more more aware and more experienced, so that when it comes time to name this senior leadership and fill these upper positions, there's a good population, a very strong population of women employees in place.
Yes, so exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to do. And then also we try to choose people from different sectors. So that's another thing that I would like to see in the next 7 years. When you look at, so I was educated both in Saudi Arabia and outside of Saudi Arabia. And one of the things that I did by default was be an ambassador for the country. So every time, somebody wanted to ask about Saudi Arabia, about women, about what life is like, I tried not to take some of the comments I heard personally, because, it's lack of awareness of the country. And so I think that moving forward, the more we have women in different industries, communicating also with the outside. So one industry that's becoming very important clearly is sports. So women in sports can be a huge advantage for Saudi Arabia to showcase some of the advancements that were made in terms of the inclusion of women. And so going back to the mentorship program in WIB and the other programs that we have in WIB, we try to select so we work with the Atlantic Council on a entrepreneurship mentorship program. We have our own mentorship program. We have multiple programs over the year with our sponsors. We do events on International Women's Day. We try to get a broad representation of different sectors: defense, sports, healthcare, so it's not only women across an organization at the different levels, it's also women across sectors, government, and different private sectors.
We'll give a little shout out to the 966, because you mentioned the WIN Fellows with the Atlantic Council. We're a big fan of Atlantic Council, and Amjad Ahmed over there, who's great. I know they've worked with you.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple episodes, we had Renato, Jeffrey, and Sarah Bin Laden on, who are Win Fellows.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring this up because this is why I'm so happy we get to talk with you, Dana, because, Renat and Sarah are telling a specific story. It's an entrepreneurial story. It's a slice. It's very fascinating. And I think our listeners absolutely find it very interesting. Your take is a bigger picture one. And I just think it's really valuable.
Thank you. We all find our path, right? And the path of entrepreneurship is the right path for them. Some joining the government sector, some the corporate world. And so it's important to put in place programs that enable women to choose whichever sector they want based on their personal preference. And that's what we try to do at WIB for the women who choose to build their careers in the corporate world.
I'm going to do one more shout out. Apologies. I say that because upcoming later, we're speaking with the head of MENA for PepsiCo, Amr Sheikh. Mm-hmm. PepsiCo is involved with you, Women in Business. Mm-hmm. It's also Women with the Win Fellows, supports all of these things. And so it seems like everywhere we go, there's PepsiCo. But anyway, what I'm doing is just, I'm connecting to different episodes, that sort of
all
thing.
The threads starting to connect
exactly.
And Dana, we thank you also for your patience when you were a student here in the U.S. for all the questions that you got and the patient answers you gave in the face of general ignorance about Saudi Arabia. So that's really appreciated on behalf of 330 million Americans who ask those questions. Dana Alajlani, who is head of public affairs at the GCC at Sanofi. Just such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful.
Thank you. And since you guys did a shout out, I am going to do the same.
Please do.
So we have multiple sponsors of the Women in Business Committee, people who we chose people who really believe in the importance of including women. So we have Al-Alayan, who has been doing a lot for women over the past few decades. We have ExxonMobil, and Sanofi, as well as Pepsi. So really, these are companies that have been trailblazers in this area. And this is why we have partnered with them at the Women in Business in order to help us advance this cause that they really, really believe in. So thank you to our sponsors as well.
Yes. And while we're on that, Lubna Olian, an unparalleled, extraordinary individual.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome anytime on the 966.
Yeah, join us.
Let's hope she's listening.
Yes. Yeah. Shukran, Dana.
Shukran. مع السلامة.
That was our conversation with Dana Alajlani. You can listen to that segment, other segments on YouTube if you want to break it out, or you can have the whole, as we called it a few weeks ago, Richard, AmChamKSA, as an audio file or as an audio download. Spotify, Apple Podcast, I think 28 platforms is the last time I checked. I haven't looked in a while, but
any
really,
platform you want.
Yeah, it's sort of, I'd like to take credit for it. It sort of automatically syndicates out to those platforms. So it was all me, but it actually was not.
It was.
Yeah,
it was.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Lucien Ziegler's in the house.
Yes. Hello. The great syndicator. Richard, let's get to Yallah.
Saudi in a minute. Yallah.
We have to get a thing made for that.
We do. But can it be as good as the stupidity we inflict every week?
And you get an original look at it each week. So there's something new and fresh for our recurring
And every
listeners.
time, that's the thing about doing this with you, which is so much fun. Each time you get on, you go, oh my goodness, am I prepared? God, it's been a crazy week. There's so much going on, is the one big thing adequate? Am I prepared for Yallah? Blah, blah, blah. And then you get on, you get energized because it's so much fun.
Wait, Richard, you prepare for this? I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I know.
It is a lot of prep. Can't even cover that up. But it is fun. Agreed.
Okay. Number one, Non-oil business activity in Saudi Arabia surged in June, supported by strength in construction and tourism. A survey showed on Wednesday the seasonally adjusted Riyadh Bank Saudi Arabia Purchasing Managers Index rose to 59.6 in June from 58.5 in May, as well as above, and was well above the 50 mark that signals growth in activity. The sub-index for output surged to 66.1 from 61.7 in May, and the fastest pace of growth since March 2015.
That is enormously good news for Saudi policymakers. Richard, the quote from Naif Al-Gaith, who is chief economist at Riyadh Bank, which was included in this article, would be a great, he's welcome to join us at any point, of course.
Yeah,
he said,
nice.
Quote, the kingdom's non-oil private sector remained on a steeply upward growth trajectory by the end of the second quarter as inflows of new business accelerated, particularly in construction and tourism, as you mentioned. Yet this economic spike may contribute to increased inflationary pressures, which they'll have to keep an eye on, of course, alongside reported increases in staff and construction material costs. But you're seeing an economy, just looking back from it, that is hot to the touch. So good news for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not much to add. They've managed their inflation pretty well. I think it's 2.8%.
Yeah.
But they're sensitive to it, and understandably. But, you know, those construction and tourism, construction infrastructure tourism, you know, it's, what has this government been spending a boatload on? And you see the non-oil economy trailing along behind. So it's good to see. And it's very encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, really good news that those are the drivers behind this, and especially at this period now. We will see too with summer. I mean, summer is going to kind of slow things down in both of those sectors a little bit. So we'll see what happens next. But that it's just great news. Richard, Yallah number 2, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia civil transaction law enacted on 19 June 2023 by Royal Decree M191 has now been published in the official Gazette Al-Qura. It will come into effect 180 days from the date of publication around 16th of December 2023. The law has 7 chapters and 720 articles, and is one of the largest legislative issuances in KSA history. It is a significant milestone for Saudi Arabia, as prior to this new law, Islamic law, Sharia, derived mainly from the principles of the Holy Quran and the Sunnah, has governed contracts in KSA. That wasn't my best read, but a really important story.
Actually, I think it's the most important story we do today in this episode, outside of our discussion with Dana. If you look at it in terms of the larger redirection of the Saudi investment in commercial environment, you know, this is the third part of 4 pieces of legislation that have been promised. The personal status law, which is in place, the law of evidence, which is in place. Coming after this is the penal code for discretionary sentences. So these are 4 major revamps of how you do business and how you conduct your existence in Saudi Arabia, either in this case, you know, commercial and you know, your corporate business, and includes, you know, contract formation, execution and termination, acts causing harm, loss and damages. I mean, it's a critical element to promoting investment, making investors comfortable in doing business in Saudi Arabia. And as I said, I think it's probably the most important thing we'll talk about today outside of our visit with Dana. It's really important, and you know, it'll be coming in at the end of this year. People will be prepping for it. We'll have more discussion about it, but this is a fundamental building block in Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and their goals of achieving, you know, a certain level of investment, a certain level of international participation in their economy. I mean, this is really critical.
Richard, this article was from, or this readout and this article about what is happening, it was from Denton's, the law firm. Law firms have been jockeying to take advantage of some of the developments in the kingdom, international law firms, and set up shop in Saudi Arabia because there's just so much going on. The summary of this piece from the Denton's piece, it pretty much echoes what you said. The introduction of the law is a welcomed regulatory shift in Saudi Arabia. It will go some way to remove uncertainty and speculation on contractual formation and how key legal risks will be resolved in Saudi Arabia. And it goes on to say the embracing of contemporary business practices and the increasing transparency reflects Saudi Arabia's commitment to be at the forefront of global business transactions. That's not that's fairly strong language and applause of what is happening in Saudi Arabia, not just with this law, but with these legal reforms that have been ongoing since Vision 2030. So it's good news. I mean, that's great.
I mean, we had just a tremendous discussion with the CEO of the Saudi Center for Commercial Arbitration.
Yes.
And I recommend it to you because they were so thorough in determining the best practices, the things that, the internationally accepted guidelines. And it was very thorough and very well thought out. And I am thinking this civil transactions law is the same deal. So it should align properly with what every international, corporate is accustomed to and what they've been seeing for in other, investment environments.
And Richard, we've had a good, steady flow of lawyers that have come on to the 966, Fahad Al-Maliki, Chris Johnson. You mentioned Dr. Hamid Mira from the center. This would be a good thing to maybe get an update on in a few months as this starts coming online. But I bet, and I know for a fact that Fahad Al-Maliki is probably one of the busier guys in Saudi Arabia now because of all the things going on with his new growing law practice. So good for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think this will be we'll have a conversation. We'll have more conversations about this. I think it's really good.
Yep.
Yallah number 3. Andrea Gaudenzi, the chair of the Association of Tennis Professionals, ATP, has confirmed, quote, unquote, positive talks have taken place with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund and other interested parties regarding investment in the tour. While Gaudenzi revealed discussions around investing in various ventures had taken place, he did caution that new partners would need to respect tennis's history and work together with the sport's current authorities rather than disrupt the status quo. We also stated the ATP did not need cash and warned about the risk of dilution.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of the major tennis players would agree with that last part. Almost all of them have come out saying this is awesome news because they see a chance potentially at a payday or at maybe larger purses for some of these tennis tournaments or majors. Richard, this is interesting because this sort of did come out of the last few weeks only. It's a somewhat recent development. This was the report. We did ask Professor Simon about this last week, and he said, it's really early on in these talks, but people that he had talked to said that this is going to happen. I think that tennis could use a jolt like this. The popularity of tennis seems to not have grown as quickly as other sports globally. It used to be huge here in the US, Richard, and now it's kind of not. But this is interesting. I mean, this ties into my one big thing, and this is the PIF is clearly interested in this, and who knows if this will be done through the PIF or through their new vehicle that they will be setting up reportedly. But this is very interesting.
Yeah, and again, in discussion, you're one big thing. The seeing Saudi Arabia everywhere, and they're looking everywhere. So we're early on this. We'll see what happens. There's a little sort of twist that I think is kind of interesting, in that they're also talking with women's tennis. So, the Women's Tennis Association chairman and CEO Steve Simon said that he'd visited the country with some players in February as part of the evaluation process. So they're talking about that. And part of the argument, part of the attraction with the women's is that, with Saudi support and investment, you can have purses that are equivalent to men's in time. So the twist is Saudi Arabia enabling women to have equal pay, which is not, if you'd have projected the plot, especially, a lot of people are critical of Saudi Arabia, is not something you might have anticipated.
Agreed. Richard, this is a chance for me to brag and possibly get a big payday from the PIF because I am intramural tennis champion at the University of Virginia 2007, I believe was the year that I won it.
Awesome.
Which is cool. I've kind of not played much in the last few years, but I'm willing to get back into it
Absolutely.
as a sport ambassador for the PIF if they're interested.
Spokesperson.
In my quote, yes. But this is, I mean, how could this be bad for the sport of tennis if indeed they stick with what Gaudenzi said, which is to respect tennis history? It is a sport with a ton of history and traditions. I mean, we just saw at Wimbledon that allowing women to not wear white or not have to wear white panties underneath their outfits was just allowed. And that was revolutionary for a club that says you have to wear all white. It's a very traditional sport. So they probably don't want a tennis but louder approach would be a guess. Music during the matches, etc. So
multicolored balls and
Richard, is this me?
I think that's you.
This is me. Okay, yeah, sorry. Yallah number 4. Saudi Arabia is considering a push to attract more outside investors to bolster its top football competition. Part of a strategic revamp that started with an influx of star players from Europe. The Saudi Pro League is discussing the option of new broadcast deals, and partnerships with PE companies to grow the competition's appeal as the kingdom works to become a powerhouse in the world of professional sport. This is according to people familiar with the strategy.
Do you remember way back one of our earliest discussions was about sports washing?
Yes. And we were like,
this is over a year ago.
Yeah, I do remember that very well.
But we broke it out into 3 areas that we thought. One was brand, which is the sports washing part. So this is what we, my one big thing today was on media and perceptions of Saudi Arabia. So this was sort of it. And we now know, and we've evolved it in discussions with people like Simon Chadwick, we're talking about soft power. But let's just say it's sports washing. So that was one aspect. The other one that we talked about is that there's a home population and audience to which these endeavors are speaking and trying to promote more participation, trying to capture young minds to be excited about sports and have heroes and work to become like those heroes, and the net effect being a healthier Saudi population. The third thing is investment return, and I think that's sort of been, for me anyway, sort of been my guiding framework for all of this. And I raise that because I think this is interesting, because we're talking about in the previous Yallah about Saudi Arabia PIF setting up a specific entity to deal with their sports investments, something along the lines of Savvy Sports, the esports. Saudi Arabia has put in place for their football ecosystem, Saudi Arabia's sports clubs investment and privatization project. We're talking in place in the last 3 or 4 months. And they're the ones who are overseeing these investments in those four clubs right now. For PIF investments. And there's also other investment, private sector from Saudi Aramco and STC and Al Ula and Neom in other clubs. So they're promoting investment in these clubs for basically for the purpose of making the league much more commercially viable. They want to raise the revenues from $120 million in 2022 to more than $480 million. They want the market value of this Saudi professional league to rise from 800 million now to more than 2.1 billion by 2030. They want these clubs to be well run enough, profitable enough to be targets of investment for private sector. So it all just folds in together, and what you're seeing is there's some economic and investment sense to it all.
Could not agree more, Richard.
Yallah number 6, a little switch up. Startups in MENA raised 35.6 million in June across 45 deals, pushing the half-year funding total to 1.6 billion. May had been a bounce-back month for investment in the region, while June has been less than dazzling, marking a 92% decrease month on month. Saudi Arabia ranked first in terms of the funding value with 25 million across 12 rounds. UAE came in second with startups attracting 6 million over 20 rounds.
Richard, we've stayed on top of that, on top of this story, which is why it's good that we're including this update today. And we've had we've talked a lot about the VC region and ecosystem in Saudi Arabia and the importance of it. And recently we had Iyad Al-Bayouk on the program to discuss a little bit about what he's doing. There is good in this, Richard, that it's, that Saudi Arabia led the beginning of this thing. Can't even talk myself. But it's good that Saudi Arabia ranked first here, because that's significant. $25 million across 12 rounds. That's definitely not where they need to be, but it's good news that they had some momentum going, but it is not, this is not good. And I don't know why, what is the broader reason behind the slowdown. Is it because the summer months are here? There was the bounce back last month, but again, that was really one big deal. So what is happening here? I'm not entirely sure. Are there not enough good Saudi startups and good entrepreneurs in which to invest? Is there a reason why some of these government fund of funds and other funds that are active in Saudi Arabia are sitting on their money? It's not really clear from this article, but what we saw was sort of a hiccup. And now I guess what we're seeing is sort of a correction and a throttle back to match what's happening globally in VC, which is basically just a much larger version of this, which is a ton of dry powder out there, not a lot of new investments. Richard, are quoted today on the review was about how AI was not even close to making up for all of the other VCs that are just not investing right now. So yeah, Saudi Arabia needs this to pick up, and it's not happening right now. It's still sort of hovering around a very nascent space. So this needs to accelerate.
Yeah, I feel like we have kept tabs on this, and I feel like it's a moment and that there's a reassessment in terms of sectors that are coming, and maybe there's a lack of opportunities. But as you referenced in the Sustig review today, the quoted, took data from Crunchbase, and global venture funding overall globally is down 18% in the second quarter of 2023. I mean, AI is pumping, but overall it's down 18% because, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia does mirror it. Late stage funding globally is the lowest since it's been 2018. That's less impactful in Saudi Arabia because you're looking at different levels, but this is down everywhere. And I think there's also, we'll see, we don't know. Also, as I said, I think there's a bit of a reckoning going on in Saudi Arabia and a reassessment of have we saturated what we've been investing in? What's the next thing? Who's going to be investable in the next thing? So we'll keep watching it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, because you have a lot of these funds are still fundraising. They're not fundraising necessarily only in the US, but they're traveling around the world to fundraise. And so they're raising funds for their next fund. And meanwhile, they're sitting on their current fund, which is just dry powder, and they're not putting it into companies. So at some point, they have to invest the money before the fund term expires. So it wouldn't be that much of a stretch to think that in the coming year or two, there's going to be a blitz of investment. Yeah. And I wonder if that's the case in Saudi Arabia, or if, maybe Saudi Arabia will be just a little bit behind that curve, but then we'll get there. But there is money to invest in Saudi Arabia. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The larger ecosystem, the global VC scene, there should be major investments coming in, if not later this year, start of 2024, which is what Iyad Al-Bayouk sort of indicated. But yeah, late stage funding rounds are way down in the US, especially because people are not really sure about the IPO market for some of these startups. So interesting times. Saudi Arabia was bucking the trend for a while, and now it seems to be catching up to them.
Absolutely.
So Richard, good one this week. Really great conversation. Thank you to Dana for joining us, giving us her time. That was awesome. And I'm sure our listeners and viewers are going to love that. Just a great episode.
And really enjoyed it. She's terrific. And I always enjoy these. These are awesome.
These are great. Happy belated 4th of July to you, Richard.
Exactly. Weirdness on Tuesday, but it was nice.
Yeah, it made for some weird fireworks timing. A lot of fireworks were on Saturday, which was weird to me because it's not the 4th, it was the 1st or whatever. So
we got together with friends, and everyone sort of realized, oh, the fireworks were this weekend, and yeah, it was just odd. Let's not do 4th of July on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yes, agreed. Richard, see you next week. Thank you.
See you. Thanks.